All right, anyone relieved to be done Ezekiel? No one's going to admit it. That sounds unchristian to be relieved for some things. We're going to spend the summer now in the Psalms. I was telling Dwayne this week. I figure if I can do 10 more years in summers in the Psalms, we'll make it through. So, are you with me? 10 more years. That's all we need. We did 14 last summer, and we'll try to tackle 14 more this summer. And then over the next other 9 years that you got to stick with me, we'll get through the rest of them. We're in Psalm 3 today. Psalm 3. We're just going to do little chunks of Psalms throughout summer, and just to get an overarching understanding of the Psalms, the different types of Psalms that there are, why they were written, and so on. And so we're going to look at, Psalms of praise, Psalms of salvation, Psalms of mourning or bereavement or lament. We're going to look at Psalms, imprecatory Psalms again. We're going to look at those Psalms like calling down curses on. Yes, Paul gives me a thumbs up. Yes, imprecatory Psalms, his favorite. There's some of these Psalms that they hit us at just the right time. And so I love the Psalms for a few different reasons. Number one, and this Psalm this morning is a prime example of this. How many people would prefer to read a book than watch the movie? The rest of you, you're liars, probably. Most people are like, no, movies are way easier. What's the advantage to reading a book over watching a movie? You get more information. Good. Okay, someone else hasn't put their twist on it and stuff like that, so you maybe get more authentic picture of what's going on. Okay. You don't miss the best parts of the book, so we're putting the two up against each other, and you watch the movie, you're like, why'd you leave that part out? Could be, yeah. Okay, you can go back. Well, there's rewind button. Maybe you haven't found that button yet, but yeah, there is. You could rewind, but it's not the same. It's not the same. You're right. The backstory is explained. Now, this is the beautiful part about Scripture. How does Psalm 3 begin? The trick question. How does Psalm 3 begin? No. How does Psalm 3 begin? This is the Psalm of David when he fled from his son Absalom. Those little things at the top of the Psalms were in the original text. And I think we need to read them as such. Are they inspired of the Lord? I think partially, in the sense that they should stay in there because they give context to the Psalms. Not every Psalm has them, but they are there. We have inserted verses that start after, but they would have been read as the whole Psalm for the people, the original readers of the Psalms would have read this as a whole, not having like verse 1 start where most of our eyes go, O Lord, right? So I think that information is part of the backstory, and the beauty of it is here. We get some more information. I'm going to give you some homework. We're not going to have time to go into it. I'm going to try to give you an overview, but the story is amazing. Go watch the movie or read the story in 2 Samuel chapter 14 to chapter 18, the story of Absalom trying to take the throne from his father. If you want a conspiracy type movie, there it is. So go watch the movie. But while you're watching the movie, it's important to know what's going on in David's head. Then we get a more well-rounded picture of not just the backstory, but what's going on emotionally in David's mind, which you don't always get when you watch a movie, correct? But when you read a book, you can get a glimpse into their thoughts, the things that they're feeling discouraged or whatever. And a movie tries to capture that in a lot of different creative ways, but it's not the same. And so here, I think in the Psalms, what we get is a bigger picture of the story that's actually happening. We get the context now of what is going on in David's heart. How is it that David could go confidently from Jerusalem and be kicked out of there, but confidently say to all the people that are going and just trust God, just trust God, just trust God, just trust God. And everyone else saying, no, we can't. We need to fight. We need to do this. We need to do that. And David just confidently puts his faith in God. So where does this come from? And this is the beauty of reading the Psalms and having these little notations at the beginning of the Psalms, that this is a Psalm of David. David wrote it while he was fleeing from Absalom. And then we read in the first two verses precisely what he was feeling. Okay, so let's read that. Psalm chapter 3. Save me, O my God, is the title. A psalm of David when he fled from Absalom, his son. O Lord, how many are my foes? Many are rising against me. Many are saying of my soul, there is no salvation in him or for him in God. Selah. Now, well, let's just look at that. The word many is repeated 3 times in those first 2 verses. So obviously there's an overwhelming sense that it's not just Absalom here. Absalom has been able to twist the minds of all sorts of people who used to follow David, and maybe has taken some of his leaders and all these different things and turned their minds against David. And now he's staging a coup, if you will, or a rebellion against David. And so it seems overwhelming. Now, if you've ever experienced strife in your family or family discord, it can seem an awful lot like this, that it's not just the strife within the family, but then all of a sudden, a bunch of different people start to get brought into it, and whether everybody else is or not, it feels just like everybody's against it. Everybody, it just seems like the whole weight of the world's coming in here. And in Psalm 3, I think we're just getting a glimpse of David's heart. It just feels like this is feeling overwhelming for David. And I'd imagine it did. So let's get a little background into what's happened here. And this is why I encourage you to read 2 Samuel 14 to 18, the story of Absalom's rebellion. But Absalom is a snake, a good-looking guy, sort of crafty, and he takes 4 years. It says 4 years he stood in the gate, and he'd stand there as people came and went from different cities, and they'd come in to seek counsel from David or to talk to David. And as they're going by, like, hey, where are you from? Oh, I'm from such and such a place. Oh, yeah, I heard you don't have any great advisors there, any people that can give good advice. Well, come talk to me for a little bit. And he'd come, no, it's just a shame that there's nobody in this kingdom that can give good sound advice. I'd love to hear this. I'd love to hear your story, and I'd love to help you out with this and give you some information. For 4 years, he stood at the gate, bad-mouthing his dad, bad-mouthing all the other rulers, and elevating himself. And for 4 years, this happened. And then at some point in those 4 years, he says, if only I would be made judge over this whole nation. And all of a sudden, he hears a few people, yeah, that would be a good idea. Then Absalom knows, I got my followers. And so he goes around to the towns and finds his followers and stages this coup and this rebellion against his father. And news gets back to David, and David says, surely Absalom's going to come, and he's going to wipe me out. So David packs up his household, leaves a number of his concubines or live-in women there, which that's another messy part of the story. Leaves them there in the kingdom or in the palace, and says, I want you to care for this place while I'm gone. And then with his mighty men and with his family and with a whole bunch of other people, some of his trusted advisors, they leave Jerusalem. And as they're leaving, there's a number of people that come alongside. We're going with you. We're going with you. A couple of whom are 2 priests, and they come lugging the Ark of the Covenant along with David. And David says, no, that doesn't leave Jerusalem. I'm fleeing, but the Ark does not flee. Go back. You will be my ears in Jerusalem. You need to care for the Ark. Surely the Lord will look after us. So take the Ark back into the temple. And so away these 2 priests go, and they go back. And then there's some other advisors. There's another advisor comes along with David, and David says, I want you to go, and I want you to stay in that palace and be an advisor to Absalom when he comes in, and I want you to confuse the advice of Absalom's advisor, because this was a trusted advisor of David. He'll probably trust you too, because you're just a smart guy. So he leaves him there. And he leaves a number of other people there, but other people leave with him. As he leaves, it's kind of a shameful exit, and it's the exact opposite route that Jesus took in the triumphal entry. So Jesus comes into Jerusalem in the complete opposite way that David leaves Jerusalem in shame. So David is leaving, scared for his life, fleeing for his life with his family. He goes down into the Kidron Valley, up onto the Mountain of Olives, and then down onto the other side into Bethany. Jesus comes from Bethany down the Mount of Olives, through the Kidron Valley, and into Jerusalem. So it's a shameful exit for David, and a triumphal entry for Jesus. So just an interesting pattern that's here. So David flees, and in his fleeing, he comes to the brook, and they stop and they rest, and people come and say, hey, we're with you. But as he's fleeing, and they go through this Kidron Valley, and there's this guy that comes along from Saul's household. And I want to take you to 2 Samuel 16, just to give you a bit of a feeling of what this must have been like. David's already leaving with his family in tow, scared for his life, knowing that perhaps his reign is over. Absalom is going to pursue him and attempt to kill him, his own son. And so the weight of this is massive. And he's also seeing that there's people within his kingdom that have switched allegiances now to follow Absalom rather than David. And so this many in the first two verses seems pretty prevalent. And then this last phrase in verse 2, it says, many are saying of my soul, there's no salvation for him, David, in God. And so this is the claim of this guy from Saul's household that all of a sudden comes out of the bushes somewhere while David is fleeing through this Kidron Valley, and he's walking sort of on the ledge above David and the rest of his family, and he's throwing rocks at David and the rest of his family and heckling them. Boo! Boo, David! You know, like he just starts calling down curses and mocking David. It's like, good for Absalom, wipe him out. Everything that you get, David, is deserved. Because you're a bloodthirsty man, and you wiped out my grandfather Saul and all this other kind of garbagey stuff, and he just keeps throwing all these accusations at Saul. And imagine being heckled when you're already down in the dumps. Your own son's rebelling against you. Now, do you need hecklers? No. You don't need someone else to keep piling on. So let's read verse 7 and 8. And Shimei, or whatever you want to call him, said as he cursed David, get out of here, you man of blood, you worthless man. The Lord has avenged on you all the blood of the house of Saul, in whose place you have reigned, and the Lord has given the kingdom into the hand of your son Absalom. See, your evil is on you, for you are a man of blood. So not only is there this false accusation and this conspiracy against David, but now there comes the accusation that everything you're getting, David, is deserved. Because of who you are, because of your past, because of all your screw-ups, because of the things that you did, because of all this stuff, it's all your fault. You deserve every bit. And so this accusation that there's no salvation for you, no salvation from the Lord in you, because you're getting exactly what you deserve. So David expresses in his heart that that's the way these accusations feel. That, like, I don't deserve salvation. Now, interesting side note, that word salvation is the word Yeshua. Does that sound familiar? That word Yeshua is the Lord saves, or there is salvation. It's the word for Joshua, the name Joshua, and it's also the name Jesus later on. There's no Jesus for David. There's no salvation for David. He deserves everything that he gets. So good for Absalom. Hand the kingdom over to him. So David, the weight of that on David, I think is heavy. And so this accusation. Then we get this little word that's introduced throughout the Psalms, this word Selah or Selah. It's confusing. It's a musical word, just means to pause, stop, maybe stop playing for a time. Some people have also just said, well, maybe it just means to pause and reflect. Think about what was just said. Think about it. So David writes a psalm and he says, this is how I feel. Think about that for a second. Have you felt the weight of that? Do you know what that's like? To have people accuse you, to have people try to take your position, to try to undercut you and undermine everything that you do. People that should be in your camp and on your side are now going against you and bad-mouthing you and trying to tear you down, whether the accusations are true or false. And maybe there's people there that are just accusing you of all the things that you did, you thought were right in the moment and that you did were good, but now they're being turned around as evil and wrong. I felt that. I know what that's like. So stop and reflect. Go back to Psalm chapter 3. Starting in verse 3 now. But you, O Lord, I love that. But you. So here was the reality in my mind. This is the way I feel. But you, O Lord, are a shield about me, my glory and the lifter of my head. I cried aloud to the Lord, and he answered me from his holy hill. Now stop and think about that. Stop and think about that for a minute. You're my shield, God, the one that's going to protect me. And I think it's interesting that we have this shield in the armor of God is to protect us from the flaming darts of the evil one. There are many. And those flaming darts are often the accusations that Satan throws at us. So in the New Testament, there is the same idea that the Lord then is, it helps, the Lord helps us to understand what is true and what is false. And the Lord will be the one to protect from the falsehood that's being hurled at him. Literally being hurled at him in stones from this guy standing, walking alongside just a little bit above. And one of David's mighty men comes up and says, David, I can go whack his head off. That would solve this whole problem. And David says, no, stop. You don't need to do that. Because what if God's telling him to curse me? Maybe I need to hear precisely what that guy's saying. Is any element of what that guy says true? What a humility from David, right? So when you read that story and you might just look at it and say, David's a weak man. Why didn't he go up and whack the guy's head off? Or let the guy? Because I think there is an element of humility in David that I think is wise when we come into conflict. That sometimes the accusations are thrown at us, and some of them have an element of truth in them. And we need to be sensitive and humble enough to say, I did mess up. I did not handle that correctly. And so let these things come. We don't need to be completely done away with them, but to trust God as our shield means to stop the fatal wounds that are going to come from all these accusations. I will not be mortally or fatally wounded by any of these things, but perhaps one of these things needs to pierce just a little bit so I know where I have been wrong. And so David says, let him curse. If the Lord wants him to curse, he'll curse. But if the Lord has another plan, maybe all of his cursing will be turned around and I'll be blessed even in spite of his cursing. I love that statement. The Lord will be a shield for me. But you, O Lord, are a shield for me, protecting me from all these things that are being hurled at me, these accusations. And then he says, you're my glory and the lifter of my head. David goes all the way back to when he was made king. What was it like for David when he was made king initially? Yeah, you're going to run for your life. So I think God was establishing early in David's reign a faith that would sustain him later in David's reign. Early in David's reign, he was made king while Saul was still king. And for a time, he did not take the life of Saul because this is the Lord's anointed. Why would I touch the Lord's anointed? It's the Lord that is going to bring me into this position. I will trust him with that. And so David's faith shows up in his willingness to trust God. And I believe what David is saying here is that God is the one that put me on the throne. God's the one that lifted my head, gave me pride, gave me all the glory that I had in my leadership and the good things that happened. God did it all. So he is the one that has established and built my reputation. I didn't do that. God did that. So God is my glory, the lifter of my head. If he gives me the kingdom for a time, great. If he takes the kingdom, fine. It's his glory, not mine. And so David rightly looks at his own reputation here and says, my reputation isn't as important as God's reputation. And so what God is going to do is more important. But you, O Lord, are a shield for me, my glory, basically the one that I put my trust, the one that I'm proud of, the one that has given me everything. He's my glory and the lifter of my head. He's the one that established me and will establish me and continue to bless me. And so I cried aloud to the Lord, and he answered me from his holy hill. I love that. Where's the holy hill? Jerusalem. Where is David? Not in Jerusalem. And so he looks back now and he says, remember those priests that I left there with the ark? And he said, it's that same place that I long to be. God's not bound by the location. I cried out and God answered me from Jerusalem. He's still acting. He knows what's going on in Jerusalem. Absalom might be sitting in the throne there, but God's still the one on the throne. Absalom might be trying to take that away, but God's still the one that's operating and active. So think about that for a second. Selah. So I love this. So I laid down and I slept. And I woke again, for the Lord sustained me. I will not be afraid of many thousands of people who have set themselves against me all around. There we get the parallel to the first two verses. Many are my foes, many are the accusers, many are the ones who say there's no salvation for David. And then verse 6, but I'm not going to be afraid of many. of many thousands of people who have set themselves against me all around. Why? Why is he not afraid? Simple answer. God's the one that's going to sustain him. God's the one that is a shield. God is the one that is seeing and answering, hearing and answering. God is the one that is going to bring salvation, which he's going to say here in just a little bit. Because it's God that's in charge, not me. That is a humility and it's not just fatalism, just throw your hands up, well, I guess nothing, whatever's going to happen, happens. This is faith. This is to know the things that we are called to control and the things that we're not. And so David puts back on the Lord, I'm not afraid of those thousands, those accusations, because really I have an audience of one. Have I pleased God? When we go to chapter 4 next week, chapter 4 is a prayer of confession. Search me, cleanse me with hyssop. Make sure that there's no unjust way within me. Make sure that I am walking with the Lord. I want to know for sure, am I pleasing you, God? Because a lot of us can look and it's like, everybody else around me is happy, and so I must be walking with the Lord, but you're actually walking in disobedience with the Lord. And that's not a good place to be either. So David looks at it and says, everyone else can be upset, but as long as God is, you're happy, then I'm happy. That's okay. And so as we go to chapter 4, we're going to read Psalm 3, 4, and 5 in the next 3 weeks. 3 is a psalm of the morning, which we see. I laid down, I slept, and then I woke up the next day. And this is the psalm, I believe, I don't know for sure, but I believe it's almost like David wrote this the next morning. Flees Jerusalem, goes and rests at the Kidron Valley. And as he's fleeing, the rest of his family, everyone else lays down. And they know they're going to be pursued, all the things that are going on in the background and all the conspiracies that Absalom has. And he says, I laid down and I slept. There's an element of peace there. That when you're depressed, it's sometimes hard to sleep. When you're worried and anxious, it's hard to sleep. And depression also shows up in that you don't want to wake up. Way easier just to stay sleeping. Then the next day can just pass by and I'll stay asleep and oblivious to what's going on. And so depression shows up in this idea. But David says, I woke up. That's a blessing from God. I slept. That's a blessing from God. Now we have a new day. And this is the psalm of the morning. Psalm 4 is a psalm of the evening. Looking back on the day. Search me, O God. I want to know. I want to know what the last day, did I disobey? Did I do something wrong? Psalm 5 is another psalm of the morning. He went to bed, he woke up, and we have another psalm of the morning. And so we get this idea that every day is a new day, and we need to wrestle with different things in the uniqueness of every day. And so David is wrestling with the opposition of his son here on this day and day after day, but every day he's going to tackle new. So he laid down and slept, he rested in God, and he woke up again, for the Lord had sustained him. Now, how much do you think about the fact that God kept you alive at night? You ever think about that? Your heart keeps beating. You keep breathing. Well, most of you. Some of you snore like crazy. You know, some of you have to be nudged back awake and alive again. But we keep breathing. Our organs keep working. All these different things keep operating without you thinking about it at all. And the Lord sustains us through the night. And I think that blessing of being woken up the next day, David sees as just a rich blessing. Verse 7. Arise, O Lord, save me, O my God. For you strike all my enemies on the cheek, and you break the teeth of the wicked. Who's David talking about? His son. It could be his son, but as Absalom stages his coup and as Absalom comes and pursues David, David says, please, please, please be gentle with Absalom, my son. When Absalom is killed in that battle, sorry to ruin it. I ruined it. Spoiler alert. Absalom is killed. Crazy story, hanging from a tree in shame, the way that he shamed his own father, hanging out in the open. And he's killed there, and David weeps for him. Just because there's conflict doesn't mean he hates his son. But he does call for judgment of those people who would oppose the things of God and the direction of God. Save me, O my God, for you strike all my enemies on the cheek and break the teeth of the wicked. I want to just take you to the book of Numbers real quick. I think this is an interesting parallel. this phrase at the beginning of verse 7, arise, O Lord, is something that Moses said over and over again. So let's go there. Numbers chapter 10. So when Moses would lead the people out lead the people out, or when they'd go anywhere, I'll read verse 35, 33 and 34, and then we'll read 35 and 36 together. So they set out from the mount of the Lord, 3 days' journey, and the ark of the covenant of the Lord went before them 3 days' journey to seek out a resting place for them. And the cloud of the Lord was over them by day, wherever they set out from the camp. So wherever the ark of the covenant went, that's where the presence of the Lord would go also. And whenever the ark set out, Moses said, arise, O Lord, and let your enemies be scattered, and let those who hate you flee before you. And when it rested, he said, return, O Lord, to the 10,000 thousands of Israel. What an interesting parallel to what David is asking in Psalm 3. Arise, O Lord. Set out, do battle, deal with your enemies, and then please return to Jerusalem. That is your city. That is your place. Be the God of Israel. So sustain the nation. Read the next verse in Psalm 3, and I think we're going to see this again. So back in Psalm 3, does David only care about himself? Salvation belongs to the Lord. We're going to come back to that. Your blessing be on your people. Sustain your people from even the evil of Absalom, the rebellious son. Please, please, please sustain your people in this. Go out and fight your battles, fight against those who might be enemies, but return to Jerusalem and be the God of your people again. Stop and think about that. Selah. Stop and think about that. Salvation belongs to the Lord and no one else. If you need saving, there is no one else you need to do business with except God. And I think this is true in the immediate sense, but it's also true in the eternal sense. Salvation belonging only to God. Let's read a passage here from the book of Acts. Acts chapter 4. Start in verse 11. This Jesus is the stone that was rejected by you, the builders, which has become the cornerstone. A lot of people looked at Jesus and said, we don't want anything to do with him. There's got to be salvation somewhere else, in our Judaism, in our background, or in our ability to be good. Maybe, I don't know, all sorts of different reasons to try to do away with Jesus. But verse 12, and there is salvation in no one else. So Christ became the cornerstone, and then says here that and salvation is found in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven given among men by which we may be saved. Yeshua, Jesus. There's no salvation in anyone but God. What an amazing little verse that's thrown in there. The accusation at the beginning of the psalm, there's no salvation for David. Can't be. You deserve death. But what does Jesus show us? That while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. There's both mercy and grace in the cross of Christ, and so now there is no other name in heaven which man can be saved, because all of us are undeserving. All of us actually, whatever accusation of wrongness, and Satan loves to throw this at you, and I want to address this for a second, that Satan loves to throw these little darts. You worthless person, I saw what you did. I saw how you thought. I know your anger. I know your lust. I know all these different things. You know your response to the enemy? You're right. You're right. I am a worm. But the Lord is a shield about me. He is my salvation. I'm not my own salvation. I don't have to be good enough. Christ died for me, and now there's no other way that I can be saved. I can't be good enough. I know. Satan, your accusations are bang on. So, I trust Christ. That's the reason I trust Christ. And I think David's heart is to God. as a God of mercy, which we're going to see in Psalm chapter 4. This is a great psalm for the morning. You may look at the last week, months, what's going on current in your life, but you woke up today. You know all the circumstances. Maybe people are trying to destroy your reputation. There's things going wrong in the business. There's family strife going on. People are trying to tear you down. Take time to pause and reflect. Are these accusations right? Are there things in my life that are not right and good? Not a bad thing to be humble. God gives grace to the humble, but opposes the proud. But at the same time, I think we need to pause and just say, my reputation isn't as important as walking rightly with the Lord. If I walk right with the Lord, God will preserve. And he did preserve David. Read the story. God preserved David. Many of the things that happened in David's life, he did deserve. And yet, God is merciful. And so we look to Jesus as our salvation, the one who will save, not just in the eternal sense, which is critical, but also in the immediate. He's the one that is the sustainer. Read Hebrews chapter 1. He holds everything together. I think that is a critical thing for us to understand too, that those he sets up, maybe it's a position that you have, or maybe it's the relationship you have, God is the one that can sustain those things. So we trust him with this task and don't try to take things out of his hand or rob him of his glory. Father, we thank you for your word. We just pray for this summer in the Psalms. Father, I just pray that we would wrestle through the same emotions that the psalmists often wrestle with. We thank you for David, a flawed man and yet a man after your own heart that wanted to go after what you cared about. And so we see that here. We want to see the same thing in our hearts, that we would just pause and reflect often. Are we walking? See if there's any unjust way in us. And then to be able to trust you with preserving whatever semblance of our reputation or our calling or our responsibility or what you're asking us to do. I just pray that we would walk in faith, trusting you to do what you would do, sustain us for one more day. Help us to rest in peace if our minds are just full of worry. Help us to get rid of the pride which is some of the reasons we often fight against each other. I thank you for the humility in David that would just be okay with being shamed and just to trust you instead with his own reputation. I pray, Father, that you would just help us to to elevate who you are, both in the sustaining, but more than that, in the saving of us and our souls. Though deserving of death and wrath, you've given us salvation instead. And in no other name can we be saved. And so we thank you for Jesus. We thank you for the solution to the sin that we have and the problem that sin brings in of conflict and disruption of family unit and things that sin brings, and shame and guilt and fear and the destroying of relationships. The thief has come to steal and kill and destroy, but you've come to give life and give it abundantly. And so we pray that we would come to you, and that what we would find there is a peace that would allow us to lie down and sleep, and then to wake again trusting you in Jesus' name.